everybody, welcome to the latest in my series of videos listing, ranking, and reviewing every Genesis song. If you haven't watched the whole series, it's not a bad idea to start at the beginning, which is number 179. I'll try to link to a playlist right about here. I'm Hans from Electric Brain, Electric Shadow, which is a contemporary art rock band, somewhat influenced by Genesis among many other things. Check us out on Bandcamp or whatever your preferred streaming platform is. So this song has kind of like a dry, stark, arid kind of quality to it. You know, there's a lot of space in the arrangement, maybe an unusual amount for this band. And, you know, if you look through those gaps, you just kind of see darkness on the other side. One consistent gripe that I do have about Calling All Stations is that the mood and the sound tend to be a lot stronger than the underlying songwriting. And this song does suffer from that syndrome to some extent. It's impossible to imagine writing this on, you know, acoustic guitar or piano and feeling like you had much of anything. That being said, though, you know, the mood and the vibe are strong enough that that's maybe less of a concern here than for some of the other songs on the album. And the keyboard solo at the end is maybe the most kind of classic instrumental workout in the whole piece. In terms of like structure and style, it actually ends up being sort of like a dark reverse image of the song Fading Lights, though admittedly much less good. So this song is notable for being their confession to being actually involved with the Illuminati and having foreknowledge several years ahead of time of the 9/11 attacks. In that regard, I think it kind of functions a bit like their version of The Shining by Stanley Kubrick. What I love particularly in this comment thread is that little passing shot about the music sucking ass as well. I've kind of always wondered if that commenter has some particular gripe against Genesis as a whole, or if they just really hate Calling All Stations. Leaving aside that matter, which I guess in some ways makes this their most important song, if not necessarily their best. This is really one of the archetypal Calling All Stations tracks in that, you know, it has a rich production with a lot of sonic layering. It moves through a few different moods. It has a structure that's a couple steps more complex than just verse-chorus. It has a thoughtful, genuinely affecting lyric. And all those things together, all those qualities together, are almost enough to kind of make you forget that there's not really much of a song there. So this song has a fantastic melody. If you've been keeping up with the videos so far, at this point I've covered most of the Genesis to Revelations tracks, and I tend to talk a lot about melody, right? And the reason for that is, you know, the production and the playing can be relatively patchy on these songs. The arrangements are mostly very straightforward. A lot of those qualities hadn't come into play yet, but they did have a very strong melodic sense right off the bat. And I don't necessarily have enough of an in-depth training in structure or music theory to necessarily be able to analyze exactly how that's working in terms of intervals and everything like that. But, you know, you can hear that they have a talent for making it work in that regard. And another thing that does work well on this album that I think is this song is really characteristic of is, at its best, a lot of the songs have a sense that there's something going on that you don't quite understand or that's not quite explained, right? That there's some kind of myth or story or underlying kind of concept that isn't quite explained or that's kept just off camera, so to speak. And this song in particular, I think, captures that sense very well. There are hints at some kind of broader story or world that's not quite brought out. And that's a quality this album has that I appreciate that I don't hear much talked about. So the lyric here is a very good one in that it tells a remarkably, really pretty rich and detailed story with a good sense of character in a very condensed space. That's a skill that they developed with more fantastical themes in the early work, Later on, they would apply a lot of that same skill to more down-to-earth personal stories. This is a moment where that transition's happening, right? Where that narrative sense from the early work is starting to be pretty effectively applied to more emotional stuff. You could almost kind of compare this thematically to No Son of Mine, actually. Again, kind of in an inverted way, where it's actually a similar narrative, but that ends in a much happier way. Musically, it's a pretty straightforward song, but the arrangement is effectively simple, and it's deceptively lush if you hear it on a good pair of headphones. I can't imagine this song really being on And Then There Were Three, but I think this is one of the more, as far as B-sides go, it's one of the more interesting and rewarding niches of the catalog. So this song kind of sits in this liminal space between good and almost really good. The bass notes are creating some kind of weird, interesting chords that probably only Tony Banks could really break down in detail. It's soft, but the instrumental texture is so murky that it actually almost becomes ominous. I think it might have been suited well to a darker lyric, and with that could maybe have become a lot more of an all-time great than it is now. This is a nice enough little tune whose massive success makes it easy to maybe overlook some of its basic emptiness. The cleanness of the sonics and the deftness of the hook end up, I think, kind of hiding rather than expressing emotion. And that middle eight section after the second chorus just kind of seems like a placeholder for something more sophisticated. As an 80s pop song, it's pretty good. As a Genesis song, I think it's actually a little bit of a non-entity. A lot of better material came out of that time. I think if a lot of other people had made this list, this song might have actually gone in last place. And if you treat it just as a novelty song, it is pretty dreadful. At some point, though, I realized, if you go back and listen to it, and you listen like to the part where the we know and the we don't know and the we all know, where those phrases are all kind of piling on top of each other, and then they break down until they're not even saying words anymore. I realized at some point that this song is actually about, it's about consuming paranoia. It's about the breakdown of language. If you treat it as kind of a meditation on those topics, it's actually kind of a fucking nightmare. I would say this might even be their most horrifying song, and I say horrifying in a complimentary way, not in a God, this sucks kind of way. I used to skip this when I listened to Abacab. Now it's actually something I look forward to. This is a good song. The melody is nice, the sentiment is admirable, the guitar makes really good use of a delay pedal. It taught them all the value of being open about feelings in songwriting, which ultimately was to their benefit as artists. You can definitely tell that they wrote it quickly. It probably could have used another section or a change-up. Not too much else to say. This is a loose, fun instrumental. It's got maybe more jazzy overtones than a lot of their other work, especially in the drumming. 80% of the songs they did in the 70s are better than this song, but that still leaves it room to be pretty good. This has always sounded to me like something that could have been on an early Steve Hackett album, like maybe Voyage of the Acolyte, which is kind of ironic because I don't think Steve Hackett likes this song very much. So this song, I think, should be better than it is. There's some really spooky kind of alien synth tones. There's a dark lyric about crime and drug addiction. There's a long instrumental break in a couple different sections. The overall piece, I think, because it was a single, it tends to get forgotten sometimes that it's 9 minutes long in the unedited form. It's in some ways as much of an epic as Domino. But a lot of the individual parts don't quite take off. The build-up doesn't quite achieve the catharsis that it wants to. The production in this era doesn't really have the thickness that this song needs. It might be the only long song in their catalog, actually, that is maybe more effective in a trimmed version. So ultimately, it's a good song that on paper really seems like it should have been a great one. All right, everybody, thank you much for your time and attention. I'll see everybody in a couple weeks when we will start at number 119.